Session 3 of the Lifeway Explore the Bible study in Exodus and Leviticus is Delivered from Egypt and focuses on Exodus chapter 12 verses 21 through 32. The full context is chapter 7 verse 14 through chapter 14 verse 4, which is the record in God's word of the wonders the Lord brought upon Egypt, instructions for the Passover, and God leading his people out of Egypt. And in these verses, we see the complete fulfillment of God's promises to Abram in Genesis chapter 15, verse 5, and verses 13 through 14. Your descendants shall be as the stars. They will be strangers in a foreign land and serve them. They will afflict them 400 years. The nation whom they serve, I will rule as sovereign. Afterward, they shall come out with great possessions. And God's promise of the return to the land, Genesis chapter 15, verse 16, well, that return, that journey had begun. The Lord's words to Moses had also been fulfilled. I have come down to deliver my people out of the hand of the Egyptians. I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. The king of Egypt will not let you go. So I will stretch out my hand to strike Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in the midst. And after that, he will let you go. You shall not go empty-handed. You shall plunder the Egyptians. So I will stretch out my hand. And the waters of Egypt, the rivers, ponds, pools of water, even water in vessels of wood and stone, turned to blood. The fish died, the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink the water, so they dug all around the river for water to drink, and 7 days passed. Frogs came up and covered the land, came into the houses, bedchambers, beds, ovens, and even into their kneading bowls. The dust of the land became lice on man and beast, lice fastening on, stinging man and beast. The Lord sent swarms of flies or mosquitoes. The land was corrupted because of them. A severe pestilence came upon the cattle, horses, donkeys, camels, oxen, and sheep. All the livestock of Egypt died. Ashes from a furnace became fine dust in all the land of Egypt, causing boils that broke out in sores on man and beast. Heavy hail mingled with fire struck the whole land of Egypt. Every man and beast in the field, every herb of the field, every tree of the field. Locusts covered the face of the earth, ate the residue of what the hail left, and filled their houses. And there was darkness. Darkness you could feel, thick darkness in all the land 3 days. One plague remained. At midnight, at the appointed time, the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of man and beast, and there was not a house where there was not one dead. The Lord stretched out his hand, and he told them, he tells us why. The blood, Exodus 7:17. By this you shall know that I am the Lord. That term know means to ascertain by seeing. The Lord, well, that means he is supreme in authority. Frogs, Exodus 8:10. That you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. Flies, Exodus 8:22, in order that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the land. And hail, Exodus 9, verses 14 through 16, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. Now if I had stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, then you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, For this purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. Exodus 9:14 through 16. And that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. Exodus 9:29. Locusts. Now the Lord said to Moses, Go in to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine before him, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your son's son the mighty things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. And notice it's to be passed on. And friends, these things are for us, and they are things for us to pass on. And don't miss Exodus 12:12. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Now that's an interesting term. The Lord only uses this specific Hebrew word, judgment, 4 times. Exodus 6:6, 7:4, here in 12:12, and in Numbers 33, verse 4. And all 4 are directed against the gods of Egypt. Now, as believers, we know the gods of Egypt were not gods at all. But the Egyptians believed, at least to some degree, that there were many gods. Richard H. Wilkinson, an archaeologist in the field of Egyptology, has documented over 2,000 in his book, The Complete Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt. And we should remember that the children of Israel had been exposed to the environment of multiple Egyptian gods and goddesses for 430 years. So when the Lord stretched out his hand and the waters of the Nile turned to blood, Hapi, spirit of the Nile, Khnum, guardian of the Nile, Atmahit, goddess of the fish, Lotes, Nile perch, and Sobek, god of water, were judged. And the Egyptians and the children of Israel knew it. They could see it. They could judge for themselves. These were not gods at all. When frogs covered the land, Heket. When dust became lice, Geb. When swarms of flies corrupted the land, Nephis and Basset. When pestilence came upon the livestock, Hathor, Set, and Bat. When ashes caused boils, Amenhotep and Ashkelapis. When hail mingled with fire fell, Seth, Neper, Baal, Denwan. When locusts covered the face of the earth, Min. When darkness fell and lasted 3 days, Amun-Re, Aha, Atam-Ra, Horus, Iha, Kakhet, Kephas, Konosu, Mehet, Menhit, and Menevis. And when the firstborn were struck, Nekbet. And all the other gods of Egypt were judged. And the Egyptians, the children of Israel, could see they were not gods at all. And when the Lord stretched out his hand, both the Egyptians and the children of Israel knew, being a child of God, being people of God, makes a difference. Of the flies, the Lord said, Exodus 8:22, and in that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there. Of the pestilence on the livestock, Exodus 9:4, nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel. Of the hail, Exodus 9:26 says, only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, there was no hail. Of the darkness, Exodus 10:23 says, but the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. And of the plague on the firstborn, Exodus 12:13 says, "Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." Friends, God protects his people. When the Lord stretched out his hand, he not only revealed himself, he revealed his heart. The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, Exodus 8, verse 2, warned Pharaoh about the frogs if he refused to let his people go. Exodus 8:21 warned Pharaoh about the swarms of flies. Exodus 9:3 warned Pharaoh about the pestilence on the livestock. Exodus 9:18 warned Pharaoh about the hail. He said, "Behold, Pharaoh, tomorrow heavy hail." And he not only warned Pharaoh, he urged Pharaoh, "Send now and gather your livestock and all that you have in the field. Bring them home." Exodus 10:4. He warned Pharaoh about the locusts. And most of all, he warned Pharaoh about the firstborn. That was the very first warning, Exodus 4:23, and it was the last warning, Exodus 11:5. Now, one more quick word regarding the heart of God. We should understand that the repeated phrases, "Pharaoh hardened his heart," and "the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart," refer to strengthening the resolve that Pharaoh had already formed in his own heart. When the Lord confronted Pharaoh with wonders that proved those things which Pharaoh trusted were worthless, Pharaoh's response was to become even more stubborn, even more stiff-necked, and he dulled his heart even more to the words of the Lord. Begs the question, when the truth of God confronts us, how do we respond? Now, take a step back with me and consider a message, a reminder from the Lord within the wonders. A message, a reminder for not just the Hebrews, but for us today, us as believers, as children of God. Friends, we face the same three enemies in life that the children of Israel faced. Number one, in the record of the wonders, we see wonders counterfeited. That is the work of the adversary. And he is still at work today. We need to be aware of his schemes and resist him. In Exodus 8:25-26, we see the wisdom the Lord gave Moses regarding the world. We see anger and jealousy that could have led to stoning of the children of Israel. And the world hasn't changed, has it? Jealousy, hatred, persecution, they're all still targeted toward God's people. In John 16, verse 33, Jesus said, "In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." And in him, in Christ Jesus, we have peace, even in the world today. And number three, in Pharaoh, we see the enemy that faces us throughout our lives. The enemy with whom we have our greatest struggles. Self. Other terms, other passages call it the flesh. And to keep us from missing this, the Lord addresses it specifically at least 3 times with Pharaoh. Exodus 9:17, "Pharaoh, as yet you exalt yourself." Exodus 10:3, "Pharaoh, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me?" And Exodus 11:5, "Pharaoh, who sits on his throne." 3 confrontations. And we see it even more in the way Pharaoh lives. Friends, Exodus 11:5 is a picture of pure self. Pharaoh's heart, the center of all he was self on the throne of his life. And in Pharaoh, we can see characteristics of self found in Esther chapter 9. Exodus 5:2, bold self, no one can tell me what to do. Exodus 7:23, proud self, he turned and walked away. Exodus 8:10, preeminent self, I control things around here. Exodus 8:25 and 28 and Exodus 10 verses 8 through 11, strong self, it's going to be my way or not at all. And in Pharaoh, we see Jeremiah 17 lived out. Cursed is the man who trusts in man, who makes the flesh his strength, who does not see good when it comes. He shall inherit the parched places. Cursed is the man who does not trust in the Lord, whose hope is not in the Lord, who fears, who is anxious, whose heart, listen to this, and reflect over all you read about Pharaoh, whose heart is deceitful and wicked. And all this is not just about Pharaoh. Friends, we can fall into the same things in our lives. Self on the throne of our lives instead of God. Hear Jeremiah 17:10. I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings. I search the heart, the center, the will. I test the mind. That refers to the interior self. It's pictured as the kidneys, better yet, the reins, what controls you. We see a lot in Pharaoh. Even Exodus 10:28. Pharaoh said, Moses, I am done with you. And that's a loose translation. But Moses responded to another loose translation. Well, the Lord isn't done with you. There's going to be one more plague. And friends, quite honestly, I'm glad the Lord is not done with me. Aren't you? Well, how about the servants, the Egyptians? What do we see in them? They listened to the words of the Lord Moses brought to Pharaoh. Remember the hail? Some feared the word of the Lord and made their servants and the livestock flee to the houses. That's Exodus 9:20. Some did not regard the word of the Lord and left their servants and livestock in the field. Verse 21. Can you imagine the conversations the next day after the hail at work? It's amazing, isn't it? They all knew. They all ascertained by seeing. They all had lived through 6 wonders, and yet some didn't regard the word of the Lord. Well, what would you have done? I would have taken off work. I would get everyone, every animal, every crop safely in. Would you stop there? Well, I wouldn't, and you surely would not. I'd get all my relatives, friends, and neighbors in and make sure they were safe. Some feared the words of the Lord. And after 9 plagues, Exodus 11:3 says, and the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. They all had the words of the Lord. Moses, Pharaoh, the servants, Egyptians, the children of Israel. And we have the word of the Lord. And it still presents the same things. It places the same things before us that it placed before them. Life and death. Question is, what will we do with his word? What will we choose? So, what do we see in the children of Israel? The people of God's promise, the people of the covenant. Exodus 4:31. We saw that they believed. And then immediately, Exodus 5:1 and Exodus 5:15, we see they did not trust in the Lord. They were succumbing to impatience, bitterness, materialism, and disunity. That brings to mind James chapter 2, verse 19, doesn't it? You believe that there is one God? You do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. What do we see in the children of Israel? Oh, friends, we see God building a nation, his people. And in the chapters that follow, we will see him molding them into people of true faith. Indeed, we will see all of the book of James lived out in them. And friends, God is still molding today, molding us into people of faith. We face the same world pulls the children of Israel faced, the same pulls, the same tests the Hebrew Christians in James's day faced. Oh, may the Lord grow us in true faith that manifests itself in more than words, more than knowledge. And all that brings us to Exodus chapters 11, 12, and 13, and the thought, may our lives demonstrate obedience to the Lord, his word, and his heart. Exodus 11:2 says, let every man ask of his neighbor, and every woman from her neighbor, articles of silver and gold. Now, we know that has to do with God's promise that they would not leave Egypt empty-handed. But think about it. Put yourself in that picture, either as a Hebrew or as an Egyptian neighbor. That had to lead to some very interesting conversations, didn't it? Some heavy questions. It had to lead to answers about the Lord. Add chapter 11, verse 5. All the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, and all the firstborn of the beasts, man and beast. And understand, the Hebrew word used for man here means a human being, the first child from the womb. It is not gender specific. Now, if you had been there, how many generations, how many people in your family would that have impacted? For me today, it would be 4 generations. For Aaron in that day, it was at least 3 generations and perhaps 4. But more importantly, the question is, what would you have been doing up until twilight on the 14th day of the month? That's Exodus 12:6. Friends, I would be making sure they were all in a house with blood on the doorposts and blood on the lintel. And the house would be filled with not only my family, but my firstborn livestock. Now, let's expand the thought. Exodus 3:22, neighbor. Exodus 11:2, neighbor. Exodus 12:4, neighbor. Those terms all mean the same thing, a resident. Exodus 12:7, of the houses where they eat it. Exodus 12:13, the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. Could that be a neighbor's house? In Exodus 12:38, a mixed multitude went up with them. Well, who does that include? Exodus 32:27 will tell us it included some neighbors. So here's the thought. Would you have invited an Egyptian neighbor into your house that night? And what do you think God would have done if you had brought some Egyptian neighbors into your house? More pointedly, are you inviting any non-citizens of the kingdom of God to be redeemed by his blood today? Obedience, a demonstration of true faith. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. With you, I'm waiting, watching, and willingly being molded.